The fact they are Christian
What's up?
has very little to do with the fact that they happen to be a douchebag.
Is the show broadcasting now, Chief? Okay, welcome everyone to the Fish of Time show. I have no idea how many viewers we have because I do not see the blog TV, but we have Hippo11222 here as our special guest. Say something.
Oh, yes, I'm Hippo11222. So again, I'm Hippo11222, and this, and you know, I've been invited as a special guest on this. It's pretty open discussion that we're having, so we can open the topic of anything. Do you have anything in mind, Puppy Turtle?
So I believe we were making the point when we were chatting before the show started. I believe we were saying we were talking about groupthink as it relates to religion and the fact that there's no particular correlation that atheists are just as capable of it. You were saying something about that, Anthony?
Well, I think what when we talk about the varying we get into debates about politics and just social strife and all the things going around in the globe currently. We bring up a lot of things socially because there's a lot of ills associated with religion, especially from a lot of people that lean to that are very humanistic or that are secularized in the sense that they don't associate themselves with a particular religion, but you can find people that are very anti-theistic. They tend to associate the ills of the world to religion, and that religion is a main cause of a lot of the wars and a lot of political and social strife that you see. And I think this is rather, I don't agree with this, that there's an inherent flaw with a religion. Rather, there is an inherent flaw within humans themselves, and that blaming an externally blaming a particular institution, I think is a cop-out, because even if we admit that, say that, you know, religion is inherently bad, or it's somehow inherently has something within it that stagnates society, but why? It seems to me that that's just indicative of just how flawed humans are, because they're the ones that create the institution in the first place. So I think the more fundamental problem here are just people.
Okay, who wants to go next? I'm sorry, answer. So we don't. Sorry about
that. Anyone want to make a follow-up to that?
Okay.
The floor is yours, Aaron. You want to go?
Yeah, it's going to be related to what you said, but I'm not actually going to make a follow-up. I'm just going to say something. A lot of atheists, or at least a certain type of atheists, make the claim that, oh, look at all the bad things in history that have been done in the name of God and religion, whatever you would like to say. And, like, you know, every war, literally, people say this, every war and every conflict was caused by religion. And I'd just like to say that that's completely incorrect. If you actually look at the history, the overwhelmingly vast majority of the cause of wars is two things: land and money. Most of the major wars really had almost nothing to do with religion at all. I just like to make that point.
If I could make a follow-up, if that's okay, boss man.
If Fish of Time wants to concede the point, you can go after you, Anthony.
I'll wait until Anthony.
Okay, you can go first. Anthony, then Fish of Time.
I think the problem here, I do really think it's people, because the problems that you see in the world, it's easy to say do it in the name of God, because what more of a justification can you give? But I think anyone can make any excuse for why they want to. I would agree with Nietzsche that it seems that a lot of it seems to be a sort of will to power where you have a bunch of uh, different groups and different individuals all on this planet asserting their wills against one another. And you have a number of them with different ideologies. And it seems to me to be this sort of will to power where people like to assert themselves for what they believe is the right thing to do. Some people like to, revel in their own power. And you see all these dictators and oppressors that like to oppress everyone else to assert their own wills. And then you have some people that, within what they see as the pursuing of the good, to do that the kind of the ends justify the means sort of behavior, where you want to pursue what you believe to be the good, even if it means doing whatever it takes to reach your goal of what you believe to be the greater good. And I think in these assertions of people's wills against one another, you end up with all this political strife and just political turmoil. I mean, I just think that's just an inevitable result of this sort of will to power.
Okay, Puppy Turtle.
Yeah.
And then Michael.
I largely want to reiterate some of the things that Aaron K. had said. I mean, I would like the Crusades, for example. To my understanding, were just simple land grabs. They weren't actually. They were disguised as religious wars, and religion was used as an excuse to do that. I mean, I would also like to point out. I mean, I don't know how long religion is supposed to have existed, but for an atheist especially, it certainly hasn't existed since the beginning of the species. Do you think that the first war was when two tribes had both invented religion? I bet some of them actually think that, but I mean, it's like, I mean, come on. I mean, Joseph Stalin did wars. He was an atheist, and I'm not blaming his atheism on that. I'm blaming the fact that he was a psycho and a sociopath. But at the same time, I mean, he performed massive religious genocide. That's supposed to be something that only Christians and other people who are religious are able to do. Yet somehow, Joseph Stalin pulled it off. I don't know. Pol Pot was, I think, also an atheist. He pulled it off without religion. They all did all of it. All of these evil things have been done, and if there was not religion, then just as much evil, or at least almost as much evil, would have been done. Not that whether or not something is the cause of all evil has anything to do whatsoever with whether or not it's true anyways, but even if we grant that incredibly humongous fallacy for a moment, I'm done with rants.
Okay, Michael, then RNK.
Well, I just want to say, when we talk, I know that it's a popular trope for atheists to try and throw out that, all these wars and conflicts and stuff are caused in the name of God, while you don't see wars and fights over the cause of atheism. That's usually how they've tried to phrase it, because you won't find, Stalin didn't say, for atheism, let us kill, You're not going to find that. Where you will find examples in history where people will say, for God and country and all that. But my response is, so what? Even if you showed me that every single war ever to have occurred was caused by religion, which you can't. I mean, there are plenty of wars that had nothing to do with religion. I mean, all you got to do is think recently. The Gulf War had nothing to do with our religion versus their religion. The first Gulf War, absolutely nothing to do with religion. The Vietnam War, nothing to do with religion. World War II, nothing to do with religion. Korean War, nothing to do with religion. But even if you grant that every single war was caused by religion, from the atheist perspective, who cares? there's no objective morality, there's no absolute right and wrong. So who cares what the motive is? Because, you know, if my goal is, you know, if I'm Hitler and I want to take over the world, no matter what my tools are that I use, be it religion or secular, what difference does it make? If I'm successful and the world is a better place because of it, then it's ultimately good.
Okay, Aaron K, Puppet Turtle, Anthony, then it's Uchi.
Yeah, just to go back with all of this, I mean, you know, atheists like to point out things like the Crusades or the Inquisition, say, you know, look at all the damage Christianity is doing to the world, and the fundamentalist Christians like to, you know, point out, and they claim Adolf Hitler was an atheist. That's somewhat controversial. And then they say Adolf Hitler, Stalin, you know, Pol Pot, all these people. Well, they killed all these people. Look at all the damage atheism is doing. And I'm just like, it applies to both. It's just an appeal to consequences. It's a complete fallacy.
Okay, Puppet Turtle.
Two things. Firstly, I'm pretty sure Hitler, in public, he was a professing Christian. In private, he was a professing neo-pagan. Or maybe even like more of a classical pagan, I think. But, the one thing I wanted to say was if you want to call into the show, which we really want callers, please send a Skype contact request to Fish of Time. It's all lowercase, all one word. And there's currently no line whatsoever, so if you do that, I will type hand and I will immediately drag you in when it gets around to me. So please, if you have a question for the panel, please ask, come in and ask that. We really, really need callers.
Okay, you done, Puppet Turtle?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, Anthony, then it's Uchi Baba.
This is just making a comment about to Michael about like motivations by certain dictators as it refers to what was going on in Soviet Russia with the Bolsheviks. Well, it's not that they necessarily claimed for atheism in particular, but they were misotheists. I mean, you can read into their writings, and they will talk about how they think religion, and particularly belief in God, is kind of like a disease and a plague that they should rid themselves of in order to progress. And you know, they believe that what they did was grounded in science, although they probably just a misuse of scientific methodology. In fact, probably not even related to science whatsoever, just an assertion of their wills to what they believed would inevitably lead to progress. But, I mean, in particular, I mean, you'd see that when they would refuse people admission to universities because they believed in God, or they would burn down churches and torture clergy. And that's probably just a manifest of just the inherent flaws within every human being. So this isn't really indicative of a fundamental fault in atheism or any sort of ideology whatsoever. If you apply, if you talk about, if you bring us an example of certain groups, but they were definitely misotheists in that sense. But I would agree that this doesn't really mean, this doesn't really say anything about any fault in atheism, because even if they did do that in the name of their atheism, so what, you know?
Uchi Baba, then it's Michael.
Okay, well, all I was going to say is that ultimately I think that this comes down to the reason why people, you know, do evil things is ultimately because of power, and whether that power is being directed towards their own religion, directed towards their own country, directed towards themselves, that's ultimately going to be the motivation. I think if you look at Christianity, like, based upon how it's supposed to be, not necessarily how it's been played out, ultimately it talks about giving up such power. And I think that is what makes religion, in this sense, a good thing and against evil.
Right, it's Michael. Michael.
Yeah, I want to respond to what he was saying about the Russians and stuff. Is that, you know, the reason for that argument? Like Hitchens was famous for making that, you know, name a horrible thing you can do in the name of religion. Now name a horrible thing you would do in the name of atheism, and you know, to try and stump people. They use these types of arguments not because there's any real practical truth to it or any eye-opening, you know, facts, other than to try and create a debate emotional advantage. To try and say that, oh, you see, people don't do things in the name of atheism, but they do things in the name of God. And the simple fact is that people can be rallied behind any cause. If you have someone who's charismatic enough, you can get people to come behind almost anything. And I would grant that, you know, you didn't see the Russians charging into battle in the name of no God, but you know, at the same time, what were they doing? You know, they were burning churches. They were basically trying to purge religion from their society, and by doing so, causing the deaths of a lot of people. And so maybe not in the name of no God, but definitely in the name of anti-religion, a lot of people suffered. But even so, all that becomes irrelevant when, you know, like I mentioned before, that so what? What difference from the atheistic perspective, what difference does the motivation make? It should make none, because if there is no objective morality, there's no absolute right and wrong for anything, then what people use to manipulate other people should be completely irrelevant, as long as their goal is ultimately noble, which of course every dictator simply wants a world that functions perfectly under their control. So ultimately that's a good thing, and they should just, you know, ignore whatever their manipulative style is.
Okay, it's Puppy Turtle, then it's Anthony Watson again.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, to add on top of that, the horrible thing you can do in the name of atheism or in the name of a religion is to slaughter the religious, as you said. I mean, it's not as if there's never been a communist regime. It's not as if it's not as if religious freedom is everywhere. I mean, I will concede that atheists are a little bit persecuted here. They also have gigantic unwarranted persecution complexes on top of that, but there is some real persecution behind it here. And that's because there's a massive Christian majority here. But over in, say, China, where there are massive atheist majorities, and I just got a friend request, so I'm going to be bringing in a call when I'm done. Just in China, where we have massive atheist majorities, you know, Christianity is illegal there. Christianity is like, I mean, something like it's way less than 50% of the world has religious freedom, and something like 70% of religious persecution in the world is against Christians. Now, living here, I said China. It may be in like Korea or something like that. But you know, it's living here. It seems kind of hard to believe, but overall, it's true. And mind if I bring a caller in?
Well, I was going to say, let Anthony talk and then bring the caller in, if that's okay, but Puppy.
Okay.
Well, just this was just to maybe make a comment on what Michael brought about people pursuing what they see as the good, you know, the ends justify the means. But if you don't believe there's an objective moral standard, there's really nothing that it's inherently moral. There's just an assertion of people's wills against one another and doing what they find they prefer. I mean, I think that's pretty much what it would amount to, just a will to power and assertion of each other's wills against one another. Not to say that anything's inherently noble or inherently wrong, because if you don't believe there's any objective moral standard, then there's really not saying that it's even good. It's just there.
Okay, Michael, do you want to respond to that before we stick on the caller?
Well, actually, I agree. I think that if you take morality out of it, then basically all you have is pragmatism. If you think about it, nations like Germany in the 1940s was probably the most efficient state that the modern world has ever known. Here you have a country that was beaten to virtual destruction in World War I and came back and came within a couple of steps of taking over the entire planet. And so if Hitler had been successful, in an alternate world here where Germany actually succeeded in taking over the world in World War II, then what would society be like today? Well, you could argue that while we would have, committed genocide against quite a few people, and so a lot of groups of people that are around today would have been eradicated, but those that survive would probably be living a much more advanced, technologically advanced, and more orderly society for sure. And you could argue that would ultimately be a good thing. Oh, sure, you had to eliminate all the blacks and all the Jews and all the disabled people and all that in order to get there. But if you've achieved this utopian vision, then ultimately the greater good has been serviced. It's practical, it works, and how could you make an argument against it without using morality?
And on that note,
Okay, here's a caller.
It's this guy, Untempered Steel. He claims to be a moderate / friendly.
Okay, here's a caller.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Do I need to mute anything?
No, it's okay. What's your question, query, or statement?
I don't have a question. I have well, I just want to say that
Okay. What's your question?
Do you have Blog TV muted?
I'll mute it. I'm looping. Now, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to say, like you're talking about Hitler being an atheist. Well, he wasn't really an atheist as such. He was a Catholic with paganistic leanings, basically, is what he was. But you're talking about atheists would argue that all religions are caused by, or all wars are caused by religion. I don't know of any atheists that argue that.
Also that.
Right, Anthony, let the guy finish. If you want to speak, just say hand. All right, carry on, Untempered Steel. Sorry about that.
Okay, it's all right. Wars are caused by competition for resources, or they're caused by ideology. But I regard religion as being a type of ideology. It's just an ideology with some supernatural aspects to it. But I also regard religion as being separate from spirituality. I don't have any problems with anybody believing in God, but when you have a holy book and you need to defend that holy book as being absolute truth, then there's some problems. It's like with Stalin. He had his own absolute truths also. I regard Stalinism as being almost like a religion as well as being an ideology. Like they also distorted science in Stalin's Russia. It's like George W. Bush tried to distort science in the U.S. pretty recently. It's a problem with ideology, really. Religion has a danger in it of becoming very like an ideology, while spirituality is just a personal thing. I believe that religion is something got to do with politics. It's a tool for controlling people. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay, it's okay. That is Michael.
Okay, I just wanted to say something really quickly. You said that no one, or you don't know of anyone who would say that religion causes all wars or something like that. Well,
yes.
Literally, I'm not joking with you. Some people actually do say that. In fact, there was literally a video I commented on that the title was "Religion Creates All Conflict."
Well, I disagree with that.
some people do say that. Just a brief note.
Okay, atheist, Aaron? Atheist? Okay, Michael?
Well, I would also point out that Christopher Hitchens himself was very fond of suggesting that religion is the base cause of the vast majority of worldwide conflict. This is nothing new to suggest that theism is the root cause of violence throughout the world. And it's not that we're saying that all atheists believe that. Far from it. There are, just like with Christians, there are moderate atheists, there are militant atheists, but the argument itself is a fallacious one. Obviously, not all conflict is caused. As you yourself pointed out, most conflict is based on fighting over some kind of resource, and usually between two opposing ideologies. And yes, religion does qualify as an ideology, which is, where religion can be involved in a lot of conflicts, but it's not the root cause. The root cause is the lack of infinite resources.
Or desire for power.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do with religion directly, other than the fact that, people in charge in religions are in fact people, and as such crave power every bit as much as non-religious people do. There was something else he said that I really wanted to respond to. And,
is it like a political tool? Religion's a political tool. And it's separate from spirituality.
Like a lot of times, like here, now I remember what it was, but here in the United States, obviously during presidential politics, religion becomes both a tool for trying to get votes and a tool for trying to scare people. For example, you have people constantly mentioning that candidate Mitt Romney is a Mormon. Now, why would they mention this when it has nothing to do with his ability to be president of the United States? Simple. A lot of people are uneasy about the idea of a Mormon being president because they don't understand the Mormon faith. And so you can use religion as an attack method by saying, see, he's a Mormon, you shouldn't trust him. Now, at the same time, you also have people on both political parties constantly spouting their religion in some way, talking about how they go to church or how God has guided them or whatever. And they're not doing it out of any kind of personal revelation. They're doing it because they know that voters will be more likely to support a candidate who asserts that they believe in God. And so it is used as a political tool, which has nothing to do with its relative truth value or not. Whether or not God exists has nothing to do with whether or not people use God to manipulate other people. But the other thing I wanted to ask you directly about that you mentioned was that you said that George Bush during his administration was distorting science. And I'm not a big Bush defender or anything, but I just want to know, how did Bush distort science?
He was trying to, I don't have any links or sources in front of me, but he was trying to suppress some information that was not, it was not politically expedient, or it didn't agree with his politics. He wanted to suppress some information. If you Google search,
the thing that you might be talking about is his opposition to stem cell research.
That and probably like climate change and stuff like that. I forget exactly what he was trying to suppress, but a lot of scientists.
Well, climate change is a whole different issue. Contrary to what Al Gore says, the debate is not completely over.
I agree.
But as far as the stem cell, I don't think George Bush has distorted what the scientific research on stem cells has been. He simply said that he thinks that from a moral perspective, we should not be messing with human tissue.
I don't know if that was what he was suppressing, but he was suppressing something. I just said it off the top of my head.
I'm not trying to pick on you or anything, but if and again, I'm not a huge Bush fan, but at the same time, if you're going to throw out an accusation like that,
he did, and I can't get you the information if you need, but not in the middle of this call. I can post in the chat, perhaps.
But yeah, sure, put it in the chat or whatever. But I just, while I disagree with Bush on a lot of things, I've never seen him as a person who distorted science or suppressed scientific. Other than, like I said, if you want to call the stem cell thing suppression because he didn't want people experimenting on human tissue, fine, you can call it that. But that's I think, a moral position. He's not trying to distort what science is. He's simply saying that that's an area we ought not investigate. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox.
Okay.
Okay, it's Puppy Turtle, Dates RK.
Yeah. I was just. I actually forgot the original thing I was going to say. Firstly, I assumed that when he said Bush was suppressing science, I assumed he was talking about Bush's support of teaching intelligent design. And
No, he was directly influencing scientists to say one thing, say something that was agreeing with his politics. But I don't remember exactly what the topics were. But there was multiple instances of him interfering with scientific research.
I mean, yeah, the right is terrified of climate science because it's terrified of climate change because you need to regulate to fix something like that. Because businesses won't cut carbon emissions of their own free will, even if they know damn well the Earth is going to blow up because of it, let alone just heat up. Yeah, I had something else I was going to say, but I'm drawing a blank now.
All right.
So.
Yeah, just to go back on what Michael said, like for example, the Rick Perry Strong ad, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, how he's saying, condemning Obama for waging this war on religion and attacking our religious heritage. I mean, it's clear that he's really just making this all up, and he's just catering to his conservative Christian audience. I just wanted to point that out. That's something that popped into my head.
Okay. Okay. On tip of scale, have you got any other points, sir?
No other points right now. Thank you.
Okay. I have. So, mind if I remove you then?
You can remove me if you want.
Okay.
Okay. Have we got London Cole coming in?
Yes, we have D. Landon Cole on Mr. Time Show.
Yay.
Hello.
Hello, London. How are you, sir?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Yeah, it has indeed. How are you guys doing? Yeah, I was just listening in. What's this? The whole thing about religion causing, blah 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 blah, everything. I don't know. I mean, as you know, I'm an atheist, but I just find that argument to be pretty weak. The obvious to me because I'm studying it, counterexample is nationalism, in that I appear to have dropped. Hello?
No, you're still there for me. I can still hear you.
Yep.
Okay. I'm getting, if you go to 1848, nationalism was a progressive force, the springtime of the nations, throwing off the shackles of the old dynastic empires, or at least trying to, particularly in the Habsburg Empire, to an extent the Ottoman Empire. In the 30s and 40s, nationalism was obviously quite a destructive force, and it just strikes me that one of the problems with the whole, religion causes all problems, sort of meme that seems to be out there, is that it just doesn't really bear much resemblance to fact, because there are plenty of other things that cause it. Religion at certain times has caused huge problems, either as the sole cause or the principal cause or as an adjunct cause. But it's at other times it's actually been something more positive, and sometimes it's been just something that's there in the background. And it may be that in the US at the moment, I mean, you have the whole thing about Mitt Romney being a Mormon. The sort of thought that came into my head when someone brought it up earlier on was about Dreyfus, the French Jewish officer, the whole Dreyfus affair in the 1800s. That it's maybe that's not the best example, but you get times when people say, oh, you can't trust this person because they're from such and such a national minority. So you can't trust this person because they're from such and such a religious minority. It comes and it goes. I've just because I've been sort of reading it, Durkheim called a religion a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. The thing is that definition doesn't necessarily just apply to what we call religions, because for some people, the nation becomes the sacred thing, or the class, or something like that. And it's when it's taken to an extreme, whatever that is, that you get the problem. Its existence doesn't necessarily, I don't think, imply any particular problem.
Okay, Puppy Turtle, then it's Uchiwawa.
Two things. Firstly, I remembered what I was going to say to that last caller, which was, have you ever heard of Calpern Piso as a person who both accuses religion of being responsible for all social ills, literally all of them, from pedophilia to every war, everything, all caused by Christianity when Christianity was instituted in his strange Jesus mythicist theory of Christian origins. Secondly, that's definitely true. Landon has basically said it. It's an issue of that exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say, is Calpern Piso the guy who says like all theists are mental?
He is, yes. Yep. He claims that all theism is caused by a mental disorder, which he calls names. In the case of Christians, it's Christ psychosis. And for Muslims, it's Muslim psychosis. So he talks about Christ psychosis, I think, almost exclusively in his videos. And he claims that that's the worst. And yes, he is the guy who claims that all theists are literally mental, like in the most literal way that could be said.
I've got very little time for that, to be honest.
Okay, Uchiwawa.
Okay, so I just wanted to make like a distinction here, because it seems to me like should be a distinction for me between religion and like principles in Christianity, and I think that's often equivocated whenever these type of atheists make the argument. They're making the argument that Christianity is a principal cause of wars and whatnot, when really it's something more to do with the way that the system was set up based upon the specific leaders inside the church decided that it's good to do this, but that's not really principles of Christianity in my view. And in my view, the principles of Christianity would be directly opposed to such things. And that's all.
Michael?
Well, yeah, I think that it bears mentioning the difference between what, because obviously this is a Christian-themed show as opposed to, a lot of other shows that may have a mix or may have an atheist theme. But Landon here represents, an atheist who is not a militant atheist nor a dogmatic atheist. He's simply a person who doesn't believe. And I can respect Landon, and we can have our disagreements and have our discussions on it and be intelligent about it. But then you have atheists and religious people as well, but that people like Thunderfoot, who thinks that, in being religious, you are therefore irrational or wrong or evil in some way. You are destructive because of the fact that you believe in something I don't. And I think that that's absolutely insane. I don't think that all atheists are these, people, these, heathens running around having, orgies every night and doing crazy things. I think. By the
way, it's the orgies, Tuesday night, 7 p.m. You should come along. It's a lot of fun.
Well, you haven't sent me an invite, so, I didn't know when. But but my point is, of course, that we tend as we do, and this is another human trait that we all tend to have. We tend to group people together. We think of atheists, and we think, here's what an atheist is. And of course, we think of whoever the most extreme big names we can think of, like, Thunderfoot comes to mind for a lot of people. Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. They don't think of just average folks that happen to have a different belief, like Landon, like Agent of Doubt, like a lot of the atheists that I've talked to on YouTube that are just, normal people that have a disagreement. As opposed to, like, with Christians, you have, if you say Christian to a person like Thunderfoot, he's going to immediately think of people like Westboro Baptist Church or Ray Comfort or Venom Fang X. He's not going to think of the kind of people that are on this panel right now. And that to me, yeah, and like Anthony just said in the chat, it's us versus them mentality. It's like when Landon and I have talked in the past about fascism. On both, people say, oh, when fascism comes, it'll be holding a cross and wrapped in the flag. I think that that's possible, but it's also possible for fascism to come burning a cross or throwing a cross in the trash and burning the flag. It's simply all, what feeds good fascism is to create a strong us versus them mentality. And unfortunately, you have that on the extremes of both atheists and theists. And, when I talk to people like Landon, like Honest Discussion, and other atheists out there that are nice, reasonable people, I'm encouraged. But then every time Thunderfoot puts out a video and he has his hundreds of thousands of followers cheering him on, it makes me nervous.
Okay. Well, fishing time, then we'll go back to Landon. Okay.
Unless Landon wants to respond to that before I speak.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Thunderfoot is basically an atheist cult leader. I mean, I don't think he set out to be one, and I don't think he meant to be one. He just started a YouTube channel, but by virtue of his popularity, he has become a cult leader. And that's, yeah, and I mean, as the last caller said, wars are started by any ideology. If Thunderfoot is style if fundamentalist foot type anti-theism is not an ideology, then nothing is whatsoever. And I mean, that's just when he talks crap about Christians. It's when he talks crap about Muslims, and I am actually on this panel the single person who sides with him the most on issues of Islam, but he is still very much a moron at times. I don't know. I would almost compare him to Calpern Pizzo. When you actually talk to him in person and understand what he means by what he says, you realize he's not being malicious, just idiotic, but still.
Okay, London, then Michael.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for your kind words, Michael. I mean, but this is the thing. There are people out there who have, well, let me put it like this. One of the things that Thunderfoot does, which is, and it's not just Thunderfoot, but he's quite useful just as shorthand, but people like that do, is they look at a group and say, I've decided that this is what it means. If you are this, then it means you believe X, Y, and Z. And the thing is, when you get people like Venom Fang X or, I don't know, what's his name, the other 4815 doing that, atheists go mental. You can't, you don't get to tell us what we believe. But then you do get people on the atheist side doing exactly that to people who, to religious people. And it's like, hard as it may be to believe, there is some variation within religion. And I know, I just find it very frustrating that they come at this, they sort of decided what they think. Yeah. And I just find that very frustrating.
Okay, Michael, then Anthony.
Well, I just, one thing that Puppy Turtle mentioned is Thunderfoot being kind of a cult leader. I wouldn't argue that Thunderfoot is not a cult leader based on his videos and his followers. But what I would say is he's not a cult leader by virtue of him happening to have an extremely popular YouTube channel with a rabid following. He's a cult leader because he encourages that rabid following. He issues them, thinly veiled marching orders, so to speak. I mean, how many times in the last year or so has he put out videos suggesting that people contact YouTube if they think this type of thing shouldn't be allowed? He's putting himself into a leadership position over these people. The fact that he has a popular channel, well, heck, the Annoying Orange has a much more popular channel than Thunderfoot. But I would not call the Annoying Orange a cult leader. I would just call it an Annoying Orange. And people don't watch the Annoying Orange to get marching instructions. They watch it to get a laugh, even though I don't personally see it as being all that funny. But I think that Thunderfoot does actively attempt to manipulate his followers and kind of lead them on to these beliefs about theists in general, Christians and Muslims specifically. And from time to time actually issues marching orders to them. And he is constantly reinforcing the us versus them mentality. I mean, that's like his big number one thing. I mean, how many times, and I know that the whole death threat thing with him and Dawa Films got blown out of proportion, but that was a perfect example of how he would try to draw that Muslims were all radicals while rationalists were all good. And so you want to be a rationalist because you can stand against the Muslims, and that Christians can't be rational. You have to be an atheist to be rational, and that type of thing is absolute crap. And is what scares me about people like Thunderfoot, because he's, when he's got a script, he's incredibly charismatic with his voice. Unfortunately, fortunately, I guess, when he's speaking off the cuff, he's horrible. But
can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah, go ahead, Lana. I'm sorry.
It's something that really gets my goat, and unfortunately, there's a few other YouTubers who I really like. And they've done the same thing, and it annoys the hell out of me. It's about the word rationalist. Rationalist has lots of meanings, and so the common meaning is somebody who acts rationally. But if you philosophically, as a philosophical term, it means you can get knowledge about or useful knowledge about the universe through unaided reason. If it's not in conflict with empiricism, it's at least in tension with empiricism. And I think if when you're using it in a philosophical sense, to come out and say something like, empiricists and rationalists, it just suggests to me that these are people who are just using words and have actually never studied what the hell they're talking about. And that really, really gets my goat.
I agree. Well, I would say that, to take it one step further, it's fairly obvious if you've seen, Thunderfoot's, especially his recent stuff, like his anti-William Lane Craig stuff, that Thunderfoot, while, he can have all the scientific knowledge in the world, he obviously does not know jack about philosophy. He simply, from his perspective, and I know that I'm simply speculating because I can't get in his mind, but it seems like he is determined that scientific method is great and perfect, and what he says about it is true. Everything else, as philosophy, religion, any of that stuff, is irrelevant. It simply does not matter. Mm-hmm. He's one of those people that will say, philosophy is a joke. It's what do you say in this one video? It's hand waving. Even though science came from philosophy, and that fact doesn't matter to him. What matters is that science, he believes in the position of scientism, really. He's not a rationalist.
You say that like I'm aware of that fact. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you say
well, that's the thing. I don't think he's aware of it. I think he's completely ignorant of it because he dismisses anything that is not in agreement with him. And therefore, since philosophy is not in agreement with him, he simply rejects it out of hand and says it's irrelevant. I'm sorry for taking up so much time. I'm just I agree with what you're saying, Landon, and I know he bastardizes the word rationalist on a regular basis, but it's because it doesn't matter to him that there's a philosophical definition and that philosophical definition has a real meaning to it. That is irrelevant to him. To him, what matters is that he is rational, he's an atheist, and therefore to be a rationalist, you must be an atheist. And he supports science, and therefore you would have to be a scientist as well.
It's Anthony Puppy Turtle that it's Chihuahua.
Yeah, so going back on what Landon said, I found that funny. I do think that a lot of people do that with the whole labeling, like, don't tell me who I am. Now sit down and let me tell you who you are, and then proceed to tell you what you stand for, even though you would be within better grounds to say what you stand for. But I do think people can be fairly dogmatic, and not in the dogmatic in the sense of something being unquestionable. Like, you can't question my reasoning, whether for good or for better or for worse, and I think that's mistaken. Now, in regards to Thunderfoot, I think he labels himself, a pluralist, but professionally in philosophy, I guess you could call him somewhat of a strong in a sort of logical positivism, which is dubbed scientism, but he definitely tends to be more along the lines of in being positivistic in his thinking. That's, I think, definitely is the case, and you have to be very particular in what you mean by rationalist, and I would lean to the philosophical definition, because if you just wave around rationalists as those who is rational, anyone thinks they're rational. There's nobody that I know of that says, yes, I'm a presumptuous, irrational jackass. Everyone thinks good of themselves. It's not really calling yourself that more than just being that. And you want to use rationalism just arbitrarily. We can all be Humpty Dumpty when it comes to words. That doesn't mean we should do that. We should have words do have meaning, and we should really be particular in what we mean when we use the word rationalist.
Okay, Puppy Turtle, then Chihuahua.
Two things. Firstly, I was going to point out what's been pointed out 5 or 6 times, that Thunderfoot is not a rationalist, he's an empiricist. And I'm actually strongly considering calling into the Magic Sandwich Show and asking him point blank, why do you call yourself a rationalist? You are clearly both either an empiricist or more likely a logical positivist, but you are in no possible sense a rationalist. A rationalist he would probably call such a person, like William Lane Craig is closer to the actual definition of rationalism than he is. And it's an epistemology. And secondly, how many times has he said contact YouTube if you don't think this should be allowed in the last year? Off the top of my head, twice. He did it once with Coughlin and Federalist Films when they photoshopped him into that porn.
Except it wasn't them.
Okay, even if it wasn't them, he accused it of being them, and he said YouTube should ban them for this. And that was number one. And number two was Dawa Films. I believe he said to contact YouTube. He may not have said to contact YouTube and get him banned. When I think about it more carefully, he didn't. But so at least once then. Thunderfoot is just, it's kind of odd, his descent. I actually think the reason Thunderfoot has been falling is because he's lost his career, and the reason he's lost his career is because Venom Thing X finally realized that he needs to stop talking crap, and he has started talking much less crap, and to the extent that he's actually made one or two intelligent arguments. And without Venom Thing X acting like an idiot, Thunderfoot has nothing to entertain his audience with, and therefore he has to struggle to refute religion. Since the creation evolution debate died, all he has to do now is just talk about philosophy, and especially since Venom Fang X started talking about philosophy, all he can talk about now is philosophy, and he's a bumbling idiot in that regard, in that area. So I mean, it's just fortunately for him, his audience are all as dumb, all almost as dumb, if not as dumb as he is. So he can kind of vaguely get away. With it. But I mean, that's the issue here. He's lost his poster boy. He's lost his PCS, and now he's grasping. He's a fish out of water, grasping for oxygen and water to get through his gills.
Okay, it's Ichiwawa, it's London.
Okay, first of all, I just wanted to point out that the etymologically correct version of rationalist means that you are a reasonable person, or no, means you believe in reason. So, yeah, all those philosophers like Immanuel Kant, Wolff, and Hume, they're all wrong. So, and also, okay, seriously though, I just wanted to talk about Thunderfoot's leadership type of thing, and I just point out like this whole reason rally thing. And I've had friends of his before tell me that okay, he's just exaggerating because he's trying to get more viewers. But so sometimes I question that, because if you're going to do something as serious as a reason rally on Washington, I'm wondering if he actually believes this stuff, that we need some sort of reason rally against religion inside of politics, and it's not just some kind of show to entertain his masses. That's all I got to say.
Okay, London.
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me sort of hijacking your show a bit, because I don't, yeah. Anyway, so if you want me to shut up, do say.
You're allowed to.
Cool. What I was going to so the thing with Venom Fang, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the stuff that Venom Fang X was coming out with were scientific claims that Thunderfoot could very easily and very effectively debunk. But I don't think Thunderfoot sees the difference between that, which in fairness to him he did well, and the stuff he was doing later, about Jur Muhammad Day. For him it's all against religion, even though it was doing it in rather different ways. For him, it's all attacking religion. It's all the same thing. And so it's not necessarily that when Sean, Venom Fang X, went away, he could easily have found somebody else coming out with similarly inane bollocks. But he didn't sort of understand that that's what people wanted, rather than his cold philosophy, which frankly really isn't up to much.
Okay, it's me, then it's Anthony Watson. Okay, the thing is that there are people out there, non-believers out there, who think that you can't be a rationalist and a believer, because I remember very clearly some of the comments that Michael got for his letter to his invitation to debate Thunderfoot, where he said that he's a rationalist. A lot of people had a lot of problems with him saying that in the comments, especially of your video, London, of your mirror of the video. A lot of people were like saying some derogatory things about Michael, and that's the thing, is that to people, is that this whole rationalist thing does apply only to people like, for example, who are non-believers. In Thunderfoot's case, it's even more now than that. I think it's in his definition of what rationalist is. It's himself, Don Exodus 2, Aaron Ra, DAPR Jones, and Concordance are the only rationalists on YouTube, I think, if I remember right.
And his rabid fan base that will constantly support him in every endeavor. Oh wait, no, to be fair, he did call some of his detractors on the Islam issue rationalists in his video. Which I remember I did a response to it. I think it was called "A House Divided." In that video, he called some of his detractors on the Islam issue rationalists. So I think it's anybody who's a metaphysical naturalist and does not believe in like UFOs, homeopathy, or any of the basically mainstream science plus atheism.
Okay, Anthony.
The relationship between, at least what it seemed that Thunderfoot has kind of lost people use as target practice ever since Venom Pig X got disinterested in the whole evolution creation debate, or at least he's not as fervent in his pursuing like a dialogue about that. But it seems to me ever since that happened, it's almost like the relationship between them two is like it reminds me of that episode of Family Guy where they make an absurd kind of I forget, it's Peter or Stewie makes this kind of absurd portrayal of like, what if Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell were the only ones left during like after the rapture, and they're just like left, and he's like, I'm gonna hate this rock. It's like, no, I'm gonna hate this rock. I hate you. And they start like making out with each other. It's kind of a crude reference, but I kind of feel as if that's just the kind of relationship is just predicated on just mutual hate for one another. And I felt like that was a good analogy, at least as far as I saw it.
Okay. Well, have we done with the Thunderfoot topic, or does someone else want to talk about it? Well,
I think I might hang up. I'm going to keep listening in the blog TV, so I'll talk to you guys anon. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's no problem.
Thanks for dropping by, Lana.
No, anytime.
That's the end of the line. So if you want to call into the Fish of Time show, then if you want to call into the Fish of Time show, then please send a Skype invite to Fish of Time, all lowercase, all one word. Please do not appear offline. At the moment, the line is empty, so you will be able to get straight on in once you send a friend request. So please do so. Whoever was next.
There's no one who's next. Anthony was next, but he went. So, I mean, we can talk about another topic as we're on topic. What did you guys think about the death of Christopher Hitchens? Anyone want to go with that first, or do you want me to talk about it?
My opinion on that will be unpopular. I mean, in what sense? Are you talking about an emotional sense, or are you talking pragmatically? Because from an emotional standpoint, a death is sad, and this was the only new atheist who warranted any respect whatsoever. Beyond that, you would give to like a random lizard, and that you wouldn't walk up to them and snap them in half just for no reason. It is bad to lose that. But on the other hand, pragmatically, where he is, he can't argue against Christianity, and he can't increase the number of people who will ultimately, under at least my theology, go to hell. So from that really cold but ultimately pragmatic perspective, it's a good thing, even though I'm not particularly emotionally happy about it.
Okay, Michael?
Well, I would say that Christopher Hitchens, I think, was in some ways reminded me a lot of William Lane Craig. He was wrong, but he was a great debater. And I definitely respect his intellect. I respected his passion for what he believed, even though I disagreed with him. And I think that, in that respect, it's truly a loss to lose someone of that intellectual ability, that ability to debate, which is something that is so lost in modern society, is the ability to actually have a spirited debate about something. And so in that respect, I mourn the loss of Mr. Hitchens. On the kind of ironic side, I would say that if he's right, he has no idea. If he's wrong, he knows exactly why. But that's about it.
Okay, Anthony.
In regards, I was very surprised when I heard the news. When it I mean, I valued him existentially in the sense that I felt like he actually cared, that he did have this kind of passion. I actually had a personal liking for him, even though on all things philosophical, I couldn't just disagree with him more. Politically, very, very well equipped politically. We talked about political issues, made social issues in regards to social commentary. I valued him. I valued him existentially. I felt like he really put himself out there. When not only did he have a passion for what he meant when he said what he meant, and he meant what he said when he would give speeches, but I like how it seemed to a certain extent that he actually cared. Now, I'm going to be very blunt here when I don't think he contributed anything to the philosophical to anything to philosophical discourse. I just don't think he contributed anything to that at all. His epistemology was very naive, very much in the line of Ayers and Russell, with the kind of positivistic line of thought. His interpretation of religion is very much influenced by his own ambition from many of the Enlightenment thinkers. You know, you read up on like Jefferson and Voltaire. He got a lot of, in their biases are pretty evident for anyone who's read up on the Enlightenment thinkers of that particular time. But I just didn't think he contributed anything to the philosophical domain of discourse, which would be seen as just as being progressive. I just didn't see that. In politics, yes, I valued him existentially, and I say that it's a tragedy that he's passed away. I can't really say where he is right now because I don't know his heart or what was he like in the moment before he died. I can't really say, but I at least hope that he's in a better place. That's as far as I would go there.
Okay.
Despite my opinion that his arguments were very, very bad, and I agree that he didn't really contribute anything to the God debate other than just axe grinding. But I really respected him both now and while he was alive, because he was so open in his denial and his blasphemy. Like, he didn't try to hide it to not offend people or anything like that. I mean, he said what he thought, and he didn't really care what anyone thought of him because of that. And I just really admire that.
Okay. We'll go. Is that to add? Each brother.
Well, if there's nothing else, there was a comment in the blog TV thing that I wanted to address. Basically, it's kind of going back to an older point, but he was asking what I would respond to regarding the Christianity being against taking power and doing evil nonsense. And he pointed out that, well, the Israelites did take over Canaan and destroy the Canaanites. And my response to that would be, yeah, they did that, but we do have kind of a moral dilemma there, in my opinion. What we have is we have these people coming out of Egypt in slavery. Where are they going to live? Apparently, so, I mean, they had to do something. It's not like, okay, they could have just lived as nomads inside of the desert. No, that probably wouldn't have worked. They had to, take land somehow. So as for me, I mean, it's not like taking power as so much as just trying to get their basic needs of survival, in my opinion.
Okay. So, response to that?
Yeah, I mean, as you recall, I did as opposed to the video a while back. I distinctly recall Wolfwing One suggesting in his response that God could have actually expanded the earth and created a new land, and the consequences this would have on the gravity, the gravity that would from mass uh, off by large amounts, enough to create an entire nation that they could live on. Uh, I've heard it suggested that the desert was made into fertile land, and again, the consequences that would have could well be extremely dire. Not to mention they're getting conquered by Rome, allowing Jesus to be under Roman occupation, was probably contingent on their exact location. So I mean, there really isn't a response to that. And if you want to call into the show, send a Skype invite to Fish of Time. Do not appear offline, and please, we really need callers. There's about 50 minutes left of show, though it almost always runs overtime by about half an hour. So yeah, please come on.
Okay, Michael.
Well, when Puppy was just talking about the whole thing about, well, why didn't God just add landmass and stuff for the Israelites? The first thing that popped into my head was the film Bruce Almighty. And for those of you that haven't seen it, in the movie, Jim Carrey is given the power of God so that he can kind of learn a lesson about what it's like to be God and what God is ultimately responsible for and his place in the universe. And in order to have a hot date with this chick, he decides to bring the moon closer so that it fills up half the sky and has this beautiful romantic interlude with her. And then he gets up the next day and finds out about all the earthquakes and floods and stuff that have taken place because he moved the moon. And that's, people think, well, why didn't God just do this? Why didn't God? Well, obviously, God created a universe with certain rules on how it works. And, if he wanted to create a chaotic universe, I suppose he could have, but he chose to create a logically consistent one. And as such, you can't just arbitrarily change things, because unless he wants to go back and change everything from the very beginning. And for, whatever his reasons are, and I'm not going to try to speculate as to what God's motives are, he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to do a redo for everything all the way back to the Big Bang. So instead, he may do little tweaks here and there. And yes, sometimes he does things that we may question morally, but at the same time, when I tell my kid that they can't have pizza for dinner, they may question my morals. Because they're thinking, I love pizza. Pizza makes me happy. It's immoral for you to make me unhappy, without taking into account the fact that if they eat pizza every night, then they're going to be very unhealthy because they don't know the bigger picture of it. In a similar way, we may not understand the big picture of whatever God may have intended for the universe as a whole. And as such, we kind of, and that's where, the whole idea of faith comes in. We just kind of have to take it on faith that there is ultimately a purpose, and whatever that purpose is, the suffering that we see, the problems that we see, will play out as being worth it for the greater good.
Okay, it's Uchiwabo, then it's okay.
Yeah, actually, I watched a interview between the Archbishop of Canterbury and Dawkins. He said something similar to what Michael was saying, is that if God was to intervene all the time, then, the laws of the universe would not be regular. And he also said something similar to this, that he believes that the universe every once in a while sort of opens up for an opportunity for there to be a miracle, and that other than that, God works through the natural laws of the universe so that it'll be logically consistent. And I think that's an interesting theory. And I mean, I don't think we can necessarily say that we know that how God would work and why God would work. And it seems kind of like a argument from ignorance to some degree, because arguing that we should know what how God would work, and that God would work in such way and whatnot.
Okay, RK.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree for a major part with what Michael said when he said, about atheists saying, why doesn't God just do this? And I've had a similar experience, like some of my very old subscribers might remember when I debated Honest Discussioner over the resurrection of Christ. Gosh, that was like over 2 years ago. And basically the point he made is that, after the resurrection, why didn't God just teleport the disciples to Mesoamerica so he could, tell all of them, the truth of the resurrection and stuff? And a good point relating to this brought up by I believe Midkiller too, basically that efficiency isn't a priority, or wouldn't be a priority to an omnipotent sovereign being such as God. So that's all.
Okay. Anyone got anything to add?
I was going to say, is that why the Eastern Orthodox have such drop-dead inefficient ecclesiology, because it's not a priority?
I don't know. You don't.
Okay.
That point's valid.
Yeah. Somebody apparently wants to talk to us. I'm trying to find out who. Yeah, if you want to talk to us, just add us on Fish's Time on Skype and you can call in.
Chirp, chirp, chirp. Hold on, let me get a sound effect.
Does that mean that there's somebody who wants to call in?
No, there is nobody who wants to call in right now, sadly. I very much wish there was, because we need callers, because we've run out of things to talk about.
So, Aaron K., could you elaborate on that? Efficiency wouldn't be very necessary for God, but I mean, I don't think that argument really works. I don't see how. Maybe I just don't understand it. But I mean, if it was a moral.
Can I interject real quick before he does?
Yeah,
Oshiwa, just my quick thought on it is that if you are a being that is both eternal and timeless, what does it matter to you how quickly you get something done?
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
Right, but then you would have a moral issue. I mean, that would matter too.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't. There is a bit of an issue with people over there at least surely have lesser of a chance uh of being ultimately saved. If there was a greater chance for someone who'd never heard, Jesus wouldn't have said preach the gospel unto every nation. He would have said, now listen to me very carefully. You are going to take this to your graves. I mean, that's just the way it worked. The very fact that he came down, started a church, etc., proves that that there's some benefits or something makes it more likely for you to be saved, or maybe even it's a secular purpose. There's some good reason to start a church.
Okay. Anthony, apparently there's a question being asked on the Blood TV thing. So could that person who asked the question ask it again, please?
So I may continue because I wanted to add something to the discussion that's been going on so far. But it seems to me that it begs the question to assume that that the people in Mesoamerica would have responded favorably to the disciples if they had just poofed up there to tell them about Jesus. I mean, who knows if they would even responded favorably. The burden of proof is up to the person to prove that this would have met God's ends better than what has happened in history now. I mean, given that did happen, reconstruct what history would have looked like and address all the particularities about that's what history would have looked like. And all those little particularities, because there's a lot to consider. I mean, how do you know that what you say would actually follow unless you cover everything? So I don't really see that as I mean, it seems to me that the burden would be up the person to prove that it would meet God's ends better. So not to just give a general situation about what if God had done this. No, you have to exhaustively address everything in order to prove that the conclusion you say would follow would actually follow. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Let's look here. Issue Baba, sorry.
Okay, 2 things. I think I know what the question about the wars. He was asking about the Amorites. I don't know anything about that, but I also wanted to input something else. I was thinking maybe somehow I just thought of this now, so I don't really have a clear understanding of how this would work. But maybe you could somehow say that since God sustains creation, some of the miracles that he would do would possibly, counteract. It would work against his own creative power, and that would be sort of a contradiction. But so, does anybody know anything about the Amorites, though?
I think they were from the Middle East, from what I remember. They were bad as the Canaanites. They were pagans. I think they were cannibals, from what I remember rightly. Anthony Watson.
Yeah, this wouldn't be in regards to what Ouchie asked, but anyone that wants to make a moral objection, what are they objecting to? What do you think is wrong with the military campaigns against the Canaanites? Because it depends what your moral view is. Do you think whether you think you come from a utilitarian standpoint, whether you think that any possible suffering could have amounted from these military campaigns would have been the issue that you took with it, or maybe that you believe that it was a violation of these nations' autonomy, the autonomy of its local inhabitants, or maybe the nation as a whole, or maybe the act in and of itself of waging war against people you would take an issue with. I mean, the person that makes a moral objection to this, they have to bring up, well, what are you objecting to? What do you think is the essence of what makes things right and wrong? What are you objecting to? That would be my question.
Okay, Ichibaba.
I think typically what they're objecting to is killing, because I've heard this numerous times. They say, well, inside the Ten Commandments it says, do not kill, which of course it says, do not murder, which, I mean, you could argue that you're unjustifiably killing these people, which is kind of question begging in a way.
Well, if I were to just answer that really quickly, you have to say, to make a blanket statement that killing is wrong in all scenarios. I think we can say that's a little naive to say that. But in regards to how we define what is justified, well, we have to define what's justified and what's not, and then we could go into a discussion about that, of what is fair. It can, because you will find those individuals. Killing is wrong in any and all circumstances, and I think that's very naive. For example, if I gave an example, not that this is perfectly analogous to the military campaigns, but just as an answer to somebody who would make a blanket statement against that killing is wrong in all scenarios. Say, I hypothetically, I have a daughter, and a robber breaks into my house and puts a gun to my daughter's head. Say hypothetically, she, knees him in the stomach, and she gets free from him for just a moment, and yet he has the gun aimed at her, but there's just enough time, at least when I had gotten to the scene where he, was threatening her with a gun, I managed to get to my safe and pull out a revolver, and she got free from his grasp. In that moment, that instance, I had to make a choice, and the most pragmatic option was to shoot him, and potentially kill him. I would say I'm justified in that, and I would say it would actually be morally abhorrent for me to just do nothing. And I would say that there are justified reasons to take life, and it depends what you consider justified and what's not justified. And then we can get into we could potentially get into a whole discussion about that for the one that makes the moral objection. So to the people that make blanket statements, I would say it's just not so cut and dry. We really have to, this is an ongoing debate about what we consider just and unjust.
Well, yeah, and ultimately, whenever we're talking about morals, we're talking about what's right and wrong is mostly based upon the intention, in my view. Like did you intend to? I mean, you can make a law that says, okay, it's wrong. You're going to go to jail if you unintentionally kill somebody. Still, but I mean, if you're talking about morals, I think it's all about intentions. Did you intend to do something wrong? And so whenever we're talking about intentions, whenever we're talking about God, we're talking about what His intentions were, and so we really have to know what God's intentions are, and we know that God's intentions would ultimately conform with what is objectively right, because He knows everything. And so we have to assume that, first of all, we know. We have to assume that we know to the same degree of what God knows, and that we have that. And even if you could say, well, we can make we can make a reasonable assumption, and based upon what we know, this is probably wrong. But I mean, then we have to consider that the people who wrote the Bible in the first place are saying that God was justified. And if you're going to accept that this is really God, you have to be agreeing with the writers on one hand that God actually did these things. On the other hand, you have to disagree with them that there was actually justified reason. And so, yeah, kind of rambling, but it seems like kind of a contradiction to agree with them on one hand, but disagree with them on the other hand. Anyway.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Can I say one quick thing on that?
Yeah.
I just, as far as the, trying to judge God was, moral or immoral. The problem that I see with the argument when it comes from the non-believer is that, of course, they presuppose that God does not exist. Well, their argument would be correct if God was a, non-omniscient being that didn't understand ultimately everything, as you previously mentioned. If God exists, and that's the first question, that's the first point of contention between atheists and theists. If God does indeed exist, and that God does indeed understand the entire universe, not just, bits and pieces like we're figuring out, then it stands to reason that anything that he does, since he's the one that created the universe for his purpose, and ultimately whatever his purpose is, we may not understand. But there's nothing we could say to debate that, to argue against it. If, it is literally his, his ball, his playground, his schoolyard, and, he knows what's going, what the ultimate purpose is while we do not. And so for us to cast judgment on a being that can understand the future ramifications of everything we do is arrogant at best. That's why I kind of think it's a bogus argument from the atheist side, because they know this. At least most of the more intelligent atheists that I've talked to know this full well, but they use it because a lot of Christians and other theists don't stop to think about the fact that omniscience is the answer. That's all you have to say, is God is omniscient. And so if God exists, there is no need for me to justify his actions.
It's kind of interesting because they're admitting for the sake of the argument that God does exist, but they're not really admitting that God exists. Because God exists would imply that God is in fact moral. So I mean, what they're admitting is something probably more similar to what Bionic Dance, claimed to believe, which is that there's some guy with a toga in the sky, and he's telling these people to go murder people. But that's not admitting that God exists. That's admitting something totally different.
Okay, Anthony.
I actually agree with you, Archie Wawa. I think that there's a people misconstrue what most theists mean by the word God. I think there are many atheists that conceptualize it when you say God. I've seen a lot of them, although there are a lot of anti-theists that tend to use this word. When you've heard them use derogatory phrase to describe God, like, magical sky daddy. And I don't think that's just a disparaging remark against the theist. I think that's what they actually think what you mean when you say God. I think that's actually what they think you mean when you say God. They conceptualize it as this man in the sky, but that's clearly not what classical theists mean by the word God. And it's very hard to even fathom omniscience, at least. I mean, we can put it out on paper and say God knows the truth value of all propositions, both referring to actualized state of affairs and potentialized state of affairs, by what knowledge of the truth, the qualitative nature of reality, through what is actual, and by extension what is possible. But it's really hard to conceptualize about that, and it might be a little bit on the part of some people that are kind of intellectually lazy, not to really think about it and kind of be presumptuous and say, I know that a better world that God could have made to ensure that his ends could have been met, and he failed to meet those criterion. But but that has yet to be proven, and I wait with bated breath for anyone who's willing to make that argument. But I have yet to hear that argument, other than just a lot of bare assertions.
Okay, Puppet Hill.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you said. I mean, I've actually encountered these people who will say, God is a magical man in the sky. And here's the thing, and this is actually, I got to the extent I will actually remove people's comments if they continue to do this after I've corrected them a couple of times. Those long lists, like that rant. Aaron K has made 2 videos on it, so he probably has it memorized. Christianity, the belief that the magical Jewish zombie saves you from an evil force present in humanity because Rib Woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. I mean, it's like, you correct them about all of the errors, like, for example, when that thing says God was his own father, you correct them on that, and they'll say, well, that's what Christianity, you say, that's what Christianity teaches. They'll say, well, that's what Christianity really teaches. It's just that they won't word it like that because that makes it sound embarrassing. And I'm thinking,
That's what they believe.
Let me finish, please. There's a word for wording it differently than your opponent because it sounds embarrassing the way you word it. And that word is straw man. I am finished.
Next.
Soapbox.
I'm glad to see I'm not the only one with a soapbox this week.
One more thing. If you want to call in, please send a Skype invite to Fish of Time, and we really need more callers. There's like 30 minutes, probably an hour, considering the past trends, though, with show left. So we have time to take one more caller. Somebody please call in.
Oh, Brian Tulsa is in the audience. Huh.
I don't even know who that is.
He has enough subscribers on YouTube. Anyone else heard of him?
No.
Yeah, I invited him.
So, Brian, do you think you might want to come on at all? Got any questions?
Yeah. Okay.
Someone was asking, why do we believe in a personal God? If anybody wants to answer that, like rather than a deistic God.
Who wants to go first on that?
I will. I mean, the rational foundation for my Christian belief is the mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence for the resurrection, and the resurrection, the ability to rise from the dead, makes one a theological authority. Given that it raises the likelihood of them actually being the theos in question, and so the teachings of Christianity, the religion that Jesus started, are probably accurate by that merit, by that credential of by the credential of the resurrection. That's why I believe in a personal God as opposed to a deistic God. It's that beyond my personal experience, which I try not to mention because they just laugh at it. It's because Jesus said so, and he rose from the dead that one time, giving him the theological authority to dictate the nature of God.
Okay, Michael, then Anthony, then Chihuahua.
Okay, what I would say is that, I mean, obviously, I think that everybody's story is a little different. As far as believing in a God at all, I think that, the universe itself, the way that it works, the way that it's logically consistent and everything, kind of screams for a creator. That creator being a personal agent as opposed to some, impersonal force. Like, for example, Anastasia Skashner likes to argue that you can use Kalam to simply say that an impersonal force is the first cause of the universe. But the problem is that whatever initiated the first action, and whether you want to call this a variant of Kalam or one of the other cosmological arguments out there, but whatever initiated the first action of all, the beginning of cause and effect, had to have the ability to initiate action. No non-living, non-personal agent is capable of initiating anything. It can simply react. Stars do not, of their own will begin to burn. Rocks do not roll down hills of their own will. They simply react to the forces put upon them. For the first force to, initiate something to happen without an outside intervention would require a consciousness. And so I don't think that it's even possible for it to be an impersonal force. As far as it being theistic versus deistic, outside of personal experience, religious belief, it's hard to make a rational argument for one over the other, except to kind of hedge your bet. If you're going to say that God created the universe, then it seems reasonable to assume that God cares about what goes on within his own creation. And if God does exist, and if God does indeed care about what I do, then it makes sense that I should probably do my best to be in accordance with that will. That's all I have to say on it.
Okay, Anthony, then Uchi.
Now, I'm not really sure when it asks about what a personal God, whether the person means, whether God is personal in the sense of being essentially personal, and that God is a will and a conscious, and that God's self-aware, or rather that God is intimately involved in the affairs of man, or that God cares. Now, if for the former, I would argue that if we're going to argue God first cause, the intentionality, I think, is the logical conclusion, because you can either argue chance or necessity, and necessity would be largely deterministic, and I think there are good reasons to believe that, at least in the Newtonian sense, that determinism is false, and in regards to chance, I don't really would hawk it up too much chance. I think you would really need you would need something volitional, a will, so intentionality, that we're intended to be here. And if there's intent, it seems to me that there has to be some sort of telos, and that this would be going into whether it would be deistic or whether God actually is intimately involved in the affairs of man and cares. But even on a deist view, it's not necessarily that God doesn't care at all. I mean, there are certain deists that do believe God cares, but he exercises a providential will where he meets his ends through, nature, a natural law, without any direct intervention through miracles. But it seems to me that God would care, given that he made us, because if we're going to argue God, at least as being necessary, first cause, you define God as necessary, as non-contingent. If that's true, well, God doesn't really need anything. God is, in a sense, ontologically complete. And if that's the case, it seems to me that God is self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't have any needs. He doesn't get lonely or anything like this. A classical theist would define God as metaphysically necessary. And if that's the case, God doesn't really need anything. So it seems to me that God, to create just a bunch of collection of objects, seems meaningless, because there's nothing to give anything to, but to create personal agents that can participate in the world seems to me to make sense as God's end. in the sense of defining telos. I think that would ultimately that seems to me to be clear sign that since we're here, then there must be a telos, an end from which we are created. In that case, God would care.
Yeah.
It's usual.
Yeah, I would agree with basically with what they said, and I would also say that that there's would seem to be if we have free will, it seems to be some sort of a moral responsibility on the part of God to make sure that that everybody, I guess you could say, is punished and rewarded according to their works. Other than that, I would just like to respond to what Intempered Steel was saying regarding the resurrection. And basically, I mean, what we have in favor of a personal God, evidence of a personal God, is the resurrection, which is supported by multiple eyewitnesses. And these eyewitnesses also died for their belief inside of this resurrection. And it just seems to me like it would be unreasonable to suggest some sort of illusion or anything of the kind. He also states that other religions have evidence eyewitnesses as well. Well, I simply disagree. If you have any proof of this, go ahead, but unlikely, in my opinion, for any of them have that. And even if it did, that would not negate the evidence we have in favor of the resurrection. It would simply say that both sides have evidence. Anyway.
Okay. And if Untempered Steel, I'd say this. The group books on the resurrection, and why there's good reasons to believe it. N.T. Wright's book, the People of God and the Resurrection is probably one of the best of it. I'd recommend that. The Puppy Turtle.
Yes, I was just going to say that it's not that other religions don't have martyrs. It's that the martyrs for other religions were never in a position to know if it occurred. Muhammad was. I don't know. There's actually some evidence that Muhammad literally was schizophrenic, in that apparently the kinds of things he came up with were in line with that psychological profile. But assuming that that's wrong and he was just a liar, or even if he was right, he was really the only one absolutely in a position to know, assuming he wasn't insane even then, that if whether or not he was right. His followers who died for Islam were not in that position. And they also weren't always given a chance to recant before they did it, which Christians, I believe, always were. That's that. So, I mean, yeah, it's. So. I mean, that's the issue. The disciples and the early Christian martyrs were often in a position to know if were largely in a position to know if their religion was true or not. That means that, okay, if they're in a position to know if their beliefs about it are accurate, if they died for the belief, they really hold it. They died for the belief that their religion was accurate, therefore the religion is true because they have accurate beliefs about it because they're in a position to know if it's true. Now, of course, people will dispute those premises, but the logic itself is flawless. It absolutely follows, and I'm yet to hear the closest things to arguments I've ever heard are one person said if Jesus never existed, that means the disciples didn't, and that means that the big high up people, they wouldn't have died for their beliefs because there's in no way has a pope ever been assassinated or a religious official been killed. That doesn't happen. Shut up with your stupid evidence. I mean, that's the end of my rant. Hello.
Hello.
Wow, we suck.
Hello.
If you want to call into the Fish of Time show, and please call into the Fish of Time show. Send a Skype invite to Fish of Time, and we will drag you in immediately. Even if somebody, I don't know, we'll let whoever's finished speaking, and then we'll drag you in immediately, and then we'll probably end the show after the end of the next call. So someone please call in, please. I don't even think.
Anthony Watson, what has his hand up?
I actually wanted to bring up something that Untempered Steel brought up. Science is based on possibility, and if you can't possibly disprove it, it isn't science. I would actually agree with that. And this could, though there is a kind of tip I would take with certain people that would claim that that claims are meaningless if they can't be falsified, because I think that's false. Like, I can assert something like cogito ergo sum, and that's not falsifiable. I would say I know that I'm directly aware of the fact of the matter of my own existence. I can't falsify that. That doesn't mean that I can't validate that claim. That I can't validate that claim, and I can't be aware of the fact of the matter of that claim, or that claiming it is meaningless. I think there are meaningful statements you can say that aren't falsifiable. They're, like certain axioms of geometry are self-evidently true, and they're not really falsifiable, and other such things. And I would definitely take issue with people that would make claims like that. Although, that's just kind of my beef. That's my pet peeve for today.
Okay, Michael.
Well, on the falsifiability thing, I think that it is, it's true that if something is not falsifiable, it is not scientific. And I think, therefore, it's not a scientific statement. It is an axiomatic truth, but it's not a scientific statement. God is not a scientific concept. It's, and so I think the problem is that, and this is where some of the newer, like the followers of Thunderfoot and stuff that really cling to this concept of scientism, don't understand that you're right. It's not scientific. That doesn't make it untrue just because it's not scientific. It just means it's outside of the purview of the scientific method, and nothing more than that. And I find it really frustrating that then you have people on the flip side trying to come up with ways to make it scientific, and that's where we get things like intelligent design and stuff, where they're trying to make these concepts scientific so that they can kind of deal with it on those terms. I think that that's silly. I think that you can come across God through logic and deductive reasoning, but you're never going to construct a scientific test that can falsify God. It's simply not possible, because just based on how you would define God, any major religion's definition of a creator God, it cannot be a scientific claim. It simply cannot be.
May I make an interjection? Just as a quick response to that, I was coming from certain people that I've met who make the claim, not that if it's not falsifiable, it's not true, but that if it's not falsifiable, then it's a meaningless claim to make, that you can't validate the proposition. And I would say that is false. Although logical positivism is very much in line with that kind of thought, it's more along leaning towards a position known as falsificationism that was espoused by, I believe, Sir Karl Popper, and he he is an also a British philosopher, professor at the London School of Economics. Now he had a lot of criticisms to make towards positivism. In fact, I believe he was even the one that coined the term scientism to describe people that are very hard in their positivism. But yeah, definitely that I think it's just incoherent to just assert that if you can't falsify it, then it's a meaningless claim. I think there are plenty of meaningful claims we can make that aren't falsifiable, but we can be directly aware of the fact of the matter to validate such propositions.
I think to suggest that if something is not falsifiable, it is a meaningless claim is intellectual retardism. I mean, it's absolutely stupid to suggest something like that because, I mean, after all, I can tell my wife I love you. There's no way to falsify that claim. And therefore, it's a meaningless statement? No, it's a very meaningful statement. It's just not a scientific one. Anyway, I yield.
Puppy Turtle, then Ichiwawa.
Just saying, that reminds me of a video E-Billy made in response to my video on logical positivism, by the response to Wolfwing 1. He made the statement that he made the statement in support of scientism that nothing could possibly be that you could never show that something is a higher authority than science because if you were to assert that something is a higher authority than science, you would have to use the scientific method to validate that assertion. So and of course you can assert that that's wrong, but then you would have to use science to show that that's wrong. So he set up this question-begging epithet.
He also refuted himself.
Yeah, he didn't refute himself. He just begged the question.
He made a claim that's unscientific because how can he even the claim that he made he can't back up scientifically? So he
you have to use science to know that he can't back that up scientifically. Your argument is invalid. My hair is a bird.
Okay, Ichiwawa.
It seems like the people who make this falsification claim are under the impression that we cannot have positive knowledge, and therefore we can only know what is not true. We can't know what is true, which is kind of funny. But it seems almost like a lot of the atheists who say God is not falsifiable, either they're holding to some kind of logical positivism, or they're just not thinking. They're thinking that in actual fact, I cannot prove that God does not exist. There's a difference between the possibility that that God could be disproved and that in actual fact it's not disprovable because it's fact. But it would go against the people who try to use arguments like the argument from evil and such in order to make this claim that God is unfalsifiable.
Okay, Puppy Turtle, then answer.
I would actually disagree with your statement that they're saying we can't have positive truth. The issue with the people who say that God is unfalsifiable and therefore it's a meaningless statement. That's kind of, I think that what they have in mind is Carl Sagan's Dragon in My Garage, where this is where Carl Sagan showed he's only half smart. He was just a nicer version of Thunderfoot. He was still almost as much of a bumbling fool when he tried to talk about philosophy. The argument is basically this. I say that there's a dragon in my garage, and I tell you to disprove the dragon. But the dragon is invisible. It hovers above the air, so it doesn't leave footprints. It's intangible, and it doesn't breathe. It's intangible in all of this. Firstly, those properties I think largely largely take away the properties that would have it continue to be rightly called dragon. I think at this point it should be called something like fire-breathing ghosts. I think dragon entails a certain physicality, and this is clearly not a physical being, but it's, I mean, if that's really, if your exposure to theistic argument is so poor that that's the limit to which you understand, to which you've heard an argument for the theistic position, then I'm sorry, you don't, it's just, I mean, the only intentional ignorance can lead to. I don't know where I was contradicting Ouchie there. I think I was going to work up to something like, I don't know. I was going to contradict Ouchie's statement that they are saying that you can't have positive knowledge when in fact they do. I've heard many atheists who seem like the kind of people who would make that argument say that. So I don't think I've ever heard that argument made. Say that. Come to think of it, I've never heard that argument, that the argument that God is unfalsifiable and therefore meaningless. I've never heard that from a person who I know has said you can have positive knowledge. So you might be right, Ouchie. Tangent over. I'm sorry.
It's Anthony, then it's Uchi.
Well, in regards to the falsificationism, yeah, many of them don't think you can have positive knowledge, although I really doubt the person that says that you can have positive knowledge. How do you know that? If you can't, then you really can't even come to a conclusion about anything. If you can't even, if you don't even believe you have positive knowledge, so how do you even know what you have to work with to play process of elimination with in order to get down to what is give it a likely explanation for a given phenomena by playing like process of elimination and say it's not this, that's falsified, it's not this, too ad hoc, not this, not this. How do you know how many options you have to work with? And if you're open up to anything that's modally possible, you literally have an infinite number of explanations, both ad hoc and not so ad hoc explanation for a given phenomena. And you basically would never come to a conclusion about what you propose as an explanation for that given phenomena. But in regards to that example you brought up with Carl Sagan, that's kind of a recycling of Russell's teapot, where it's not, I think it's a bad analogy to God, but it's kind of like a proposed hypothetical entity, which it does have physicality, or at least according to Carl Sagan, it's just, just because something's invisible doesn't mean it's not physical. But he proposed like a hypothetical entity, which has so many ad hoc features as to make it unfalsifiable. But the problem is that it's not like some backpedal from the theists that say, oh, we want to make God unfalsifiable, let's make him immaterial. No, it's because as a theist, I believe asserting that matter is metaphysically necessary, I think leads to absurd conclusions, and it's not ontologically possible for matter to be the necessary, to be fundamental. So that's why I would regard, and if that's true, then whatever is fundamental is not material. If the assuming material as necessary leads to contradictions and leads to metaphysical absurdities, then you would have to logically conclude with the alternative, that which is not material. So that's why I would come to that. And Russell's teapot doesn't really fare any much better, because again, he was coming from positivistic framework where, if it cannot be known by science, it cannot be known. You can actually look up a quote where he explicitly says that. So it definitely comes from misconstruing the concept of God and giving as an example something that is completely disanalogous. So yeah, that it would be, I think, a mistake on their part.
So most of my knowledge, I'm going to admit that I haven't really done my homework on this topic, but most of my knowledge on this topic comes from concordance. And basically what he says is we provisionally accept things like causality until it's really confusing for me. It's like
Until the evidence contradicts them, I think is what you're looking for.
Well, we provisionally accept it until it's falsified. And he's told me in the past that he thinks that the only real position to hold would be the solipsist position. So I don't know, but another thing that I've heard from atheists is that we should hold all things to be false until it's proven true, and then also that we can't prove a negative. So I don't know. They just don't even seem to agree within themselves. It's really confusing.
I think that's misplaced. Is it all right if I make an interjection at all?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that comes from a kind of hyperbolic skepticism, which I think is misplaced, other than sticking with Descartes' methodological skepticism, where you take everything off the table and you try to see what you can put on epistemically to what you put as the foundation for what you can know, which I think, when it comes down to it, that which is fundamental would be a priori reasoning. So that which is self-evident and that which you could reason deductively. And then from that, you go with inductive reasoning, next level up, and you build from there. But your foundation, the foundation, I think, would be a priori reasoning. To come from the hyperbolic thought that, you can't be sure of anything. Well, if you assert that we can't be sure of anything, then that would immediately lead to self-refutation, because you couldn't even know that for sure. And if you can't know that for sure, well, there's no reason why you should even adhere to that methodology. And if you can be sure, well, then then that's something you can be sure of, which refutes that very proposition that you can't be sure of anything. So if that's the case, then the inverse must be true. You do know something for sure, and then we got to figure out what that thing is. And the knowing that there is something that you can know for sure is one of those things. And I think we should start at what we can know a priori, and I think the cogito is a good place to start.
Okay, Michael.
Well, I wish, I don't know why I haven't thought of this before, but when you were talking earlier about the atheists commonly will say that we should not believe in something unless given sufficient evidence to believe in it, which is true. Many atheists make this argument. And yet, and a lot of the times it's the same, the same group that will make the suggestion that scientism is science is the ultimate authority on these types of issues, and yet science cannot prove anything true. Science can only disprove ideas, and so they are contradicting themselves. If you are to reject anything that is not proven true, and science is the final authority, then you should not believe anything, period.
That includes skepticism.
I would agree with their statement that you say atheists should. I would agree with the statement that you shouldn't believe in something until it's demonstrated to be accurate beyond a reasonable doubt. At least not an important thing. At least not like an important thing. Just a random, I had a flat tire. That's why I'm late. That's not. That's just a random. That's not important. Perhaps they were late for some other reason. It doesn't matter all that much. But when it's something important, you should demand reason to believe it, or enough reasons to believe it that you are obligated to believe it. But that's not the issue. The issue is Christianity well evidenced enough to meet that requirement? And I think it's difficult to dispute that it is.
Anthony, then Uchi.
Well, I think when it comes down to it, I think when people put doubt up on a pedestal, where they espouse that more than anything as the highest principle is to doubt. I think the problem is doubt is considered and put so high on a pedestal that it's almost. I think I'm getting this from David P. Withun because I like when he said this. To anyone that doesn't know, you should look up his channel. But when he said doubt is put up on a pedestal so much by some skeptics that you can't even doubt your own doubt, and doubt, when you can't doubt your own doubt, doubt becomes its own dogma. I think you should really be careful of that. So you want to say doubt everything, well, doubt your own doubt as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it seems like they're it seems like to me they're looking at the glass half full or half empty, and I would rather look at it half full and say, well, I'm willing to accept this kind of, like, I'm not as, I guess I'm just not as skeptical as they are. I'm willing to accept things if it's reasonable. But coming from what Puppy Turtle said, he said that that whenever you have risks involving things, you have to say, okay, what am I? You have to set up like a bet. And Immanuel Kant mentioned this. You are more willing to believe like something unimportant, like there's aliens out there, but you're not going to act on that. And with Christianity, whenever we look at this, what kind of risks are involved with that? And this is where I think a lot of atheists kind of strawman Pascal's wager, and we have to. It's kind of like doing that. It's like, okay, well, is it reasonable to doubt? Do we have reason enough to doubt the Christian idea? I mean, if we have, more than 50%, it's like our risk of acting upon it is not that great whenever you consider Pascal's wager. So the requirements for belief should be much lower than some atheists try to bring out. I guess you can kind of get what I'm saying there.
Okay. Does anyone else have any final thoughts, because it's getting to that time again?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
no.
Ben? Sure. Yeah, well, I think it's because most people are preparing for Christmas. Okay. So, yeah, we're over time. So, yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for listening in. What's the next show, Puppy Turtle?
The next show is, according to the schedule, morality is the topic with Epidemic 2020. I am actually going to be a bit of a devil's advocate on that show because I personally do not see moral argument as any good whatsoever. Epidemic 2020 is the planned guest star. I will have to check back with him again. If he's not, then I'll get somebody else on as the guest star.
Yes, Uchiwawa did, I think.
What?
Uchiwawa, did you record it?
Yeah, it should be recorded.
Okay, there you go. Well, thanks everyone, and could you play the music now, Puppy Turtle?
What?
The music, the outro.
Oh, the outro music. Hold on, let me get it. It's in my favorites. I'll have to go from there.
Like, not like Mr. Rogers, we should have like a formalized goodbye song.
It's a couple of favorites back, so you'll have to excuse me as I'm required to run and grab it. There it is, 14. Ouchie, do you want the link to it so you can play it yourself and give them a much clearer picture of it?
I think that'll take too much time. Just go and play it. Maybe next time.